Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Death of a Sun God, written by OGGruntComm. On New Year's Day in 2100, just as humanity celebrated another year of prosperity, the diverse gods of old and new convened for a celestial council. That day, after 4 hours of deliberation, the gods decided humanity's fate. The gods declared war on man. The first battle occurred and the first blood was spilled, in the same room where the war was decided. The gods, demigods, and titans who disagreed with the decision and protested against it were the first of all due to concerns about rebellion. Few survived to warn mankind's many leaders. It was the first time the Celestials had directly contacted public figures in the mortal realm in several millennia. It did not take long for mankind to believe them after the initial strikes cast from the heavens by their newfound enemies. These are the stories of this violent and bloody war. Both man and god would fall, cities would burn, and bodies would pile atop mountains. They call this war the Pantheon War. A spark of light popped in the sky, followed by a boom of broken air before a crumpled object impacted the ground below. The ground was ripped asunder as the object skidded across its surface. After traveling a few meters, it slowed to a stop. A man with winged sandals lay within the trench of scorched rock and dirt, coughing uncontrollably as he held a fresh wound around a radiant arrow embedded in his right leg. Another figure appeared as if born from the sun above, gently lowering towards the ground beside the wounded man. Wings made of brilliant light glistened against the dust-choked air. "Hermes," Apollo said, his golden hair settling upon his shoulders and his bow held tightly in his left hand. "It pains me to do this to you. It really does." Apollo slowly drew back the string on his bow, an arrow of light forming in the gap between the bow and its string. Hermes coughed in pained breaths as the air remained thick with dust. "You can still stop, Apollo. You don't need to do this." "I am following orders from our father, traitor," Apollo said, his previous feeling of empathy quickly giving way to pointed anger. "Father is wrong," Hermes said, using his arms to prop himself up against the rock his body had pulled from the earth. "Blasphemy!" Apollo released an arrow from his taut bow. The beam of light pierced Hermes' lower abdomen. A cry of pain filled the silence. "Apollo, please!" Hermes cried out, the wings on his feet fluttering as they attempted to carry him away, only to plop him a few feet to the side. "They are tracking me. You need to go, brother," Hermes said, his eyes heavy with concern. "Let the mortals come. They should witness their weak, traitorous pigs squirm beneath me," Apollo said, stringing another arrow in his celestial bow. "Apollo, please, they are different now. You need to end this foolish crusade against them," Hermes said, focusing on the tip of the arrow aimed at his head. "We've discussed this before. You know where I stand. Now use whatever is left of your dignity to die righteously." A distant crack was heard miles away before a massive gust of wind struck both gods, obscuring the view between Apollo and Hermes. "They're here," Hermes said, in a saddened tone. "Who? The mortals!" Apollo yelled. He lifted his hand, calling upon the sun above. A large beam of light and energy ripped through the cloud and dust and into the god, pulsing outwards to clear air completely around him. Apollo looked down at what appeared to be a cylindrical object embedded in the ground between him and Hermes. Its width was comparable to that of a telephone pole. Hermes quickly turned away from it and covered his mouth. Several hatches popped open along the object's sides. Black smoke that glistened purple against the light quickly filled the environment around them. As it flowed and billowed, the sun's rays were extinguished, seemingly absorbed by the smoke. Apollo quickly launched himself backward from the device, but a similar device impacted the ground behind him. The entire field quickly became engulfed in a strange cloud of darkness. "What? What is this?" Apollo coughed as his throat seized shut from the horrid substance quickly consumed by the space around them. He felt the sunlight being drawn away from his body the more he breathed in the substance. "The humans have changed," Hermes cried out in the darkness, desperation filling his voice. "Surrender! I can try and convince them. Please!" Through his pain and coughs, Apollo raised his hand again and called to the sun. But he received no response. A feeling reserved only to his father entered his heart. Fear. Apollo extended his beautiful wings and beat them against the air to generate wind, With each thrust of his wings, pain and weakness set in. With time, the thick cloud of particles gave way and cleared from around him. Apollo dropped to his knees, coughing and spitting up black and golden fluid. His throat and lungs burned, as if he had drunk the flames of Hades. Then Apollo felt an overwhelming presence in front of him, one filled with utter hate, rage, and anger. "Father," Apollo asked, his eyes rising to meet 7 men standing before him, clad in armor unlike anything he'd ever seen. Their helmets had attached masks that closely resembled those worn by the Greek warriors of old. Hermes lay behind them, surrounded by a few differently dressed humans, tending to his wounds as a small craft lowered itself beside them. Apollo quickly raised his arms and released an arrow at one of the men. The weakened arrow of light broke against the man's armor. In response, he raised his weapon and fired several rounds into Apollo's shoulder. Apollo felt the rounds pierce his otherwise impenetrable skin. He yelled in pain and confusion, his body twisting violently from the impact. "How?" he demanded. A bit of sunlight caught Apollo's back, giving him a familiar, warm embrace. His power slowly filled his body once more, but he did not feel the same warmth in his shoulder. It felt cold, devoid of his celestial heritage. "Don't kill him! Capture him like One of the human medical personnel placed a hand on over Hermes' mouth. She gave him a stern look that quickly made the messenger god submit. Apollo quickly grasped to his bow. Just as he turned to release the golden arrow, he felt a flash of pain pierce his side. He roared in pain and anger before being met with a swift kick across his face. More of his golden blood splashed across the dirt below. He slowly turned his head to see a spear made of darkened material protruding from his side, buried deep within his ribcage. "Not possible," Apollo said weakly. The sun above beamed upon Apollo for a short time before one of the armored humans bucked it. That brief exposure gave him just enough strength to launch his right arm forward. A beam of light burst from his hand and struck the human's chest, launching him several feet away. "I am Apollo!" the sun god exclaimed, his right hand gripping the spear's shaft as energy from the sun slowly filled the empty void inside him. He pulled the spear from his body and threw it aside. The operator Apollo had blasted earlier lay motionless beyond the thinning cloud. A molten cavity burned through his armor. "Son of Zeus!" Apollo slowly rose from the ground as his wounds began to heal. The 6 remaining men stood still as he rose, seemingly unfazed by his newfound strength. "Your ancestors worshipped at the sight of my dawn, and now you dare raise arms against me." Apollo spat blood towards the armored men. His hair was dirty and ragged, but he still attempted to feign strength. "When we feared you," one of the men responded, his voice cold and mechanical through the helmet speaker. "Then I'll remind you of your place. You will kneel." Apollo raised his bow and quickly notched an arrow of light, aiming it towards one of them. "Never again." "Copy. Shot out." "What?" Apollo asked. Another crack split the air. A second object raced across the sky and struck the ground before Apollo, throwing off his aim just enough for the arrow to pass to the right of its target. Apollo's anger reached its peak when he recognized the familiar pod. "No!" His wings snapped open and launched him into the air. Before he could escape, another pod collided directly with him. The impact destroying the device and hurled Apollo back to the ground, its dark contents spilling over him and enveloping him once again. The moment the substance covered the 6 men, their figures shifted in different directions. Before Apollo could disperse the smoke again, he felt someone grab one of his wings. Instinctively, his left hand dropped his bow, and he threw his fist towards whoever held his wing, only for something else to catch it. Before he could react, he felt a joint between his forearm and up-arm tear and snap cleanly. Golden light surged through the wound, knitting flesh and bone together. The healing had barely begun when another figure appeared. A blade splashed across his back before he felt his wings separate and fall to the ground. "I am!" Before he could proclaim his godhood again, a solid impact struck his face, separating his lower jaw from his skull. His solar power healed his wounds again, but more slowly this time. Each wound healed, but at a cost. For the first time in his immortal existence, he questioned whether his divinity had a limit. And it terrified him. "Alpha is showing degradation," the voice spoke within the darkness. "What? Alpha, fight me!" Apollo demanded. "Continue attrition," another voice responded. "Yes, sir," 5 voices answered in unison. Apollo quickly shot out his right hand and grabbed one of the men by the throat. The armored mortal quickly unsheathed his blade and thrust it through the god's forearm. The blade slipped between his radius and ulna before twisting, separating the two bones and forcing Apollo to release him. Rage drowned out Apollo's pain and fear. He lunged through the darkness and slammed into the mortal, pinning him to the ground with his other arm. His ruined arm had barely healed, but it did not matter. With a roar, he drove his damaged hand into the man's chest plate. As flesh met metal, his hand split until the bone pierced through. The blood of the man and god mixed and sprayed across Apollo. His eyes gleamed with both rage and delight as blood dripped across his cheeks and lips. A terrible grin stretched across his face. "Pour us down," one of the figures said as the dark dust slowly began to dissipate. "Attrition is complete. Execute Alpha," the voice ordered. Apollo attempted to stand, sensing violent intent behind him. Just as he tried to rise, he felt his arm being tugged downward. He looked down to see the dying mortal holding his arm with both hands. It gurgled words. The man spoke through his helmet speaker. "Never again." Another piercing pain cut through Apollo's back, and then through his chest. The spearhead hovering just above the dying man. Blood exploded from Apollo's mouth. The dust subsided, revealing one of the men standing above him with the spear. Apollo felt the sun's energy finally touch his skin again, but he noticed that he could no longer use it as he had before. He was there, yet somehow beyond his reach. Something had disconnected him from his divinity. Before he could determine the source, his hair was pulled back, exposing his throat to the world. The dying mortal then raised the same blade he had used to injure Apollo and pressed it against the god's throat. "Father!" Apollo said. Before his mind could process the answer, his life force strained from his neck onto the earth. "No!" Hermes cried out, his face drained of everything but absolute horror. Apollo's head slumped forward before one of the other men promptly cut it off. The dead mortal's blade fell to the ground beside Apollo's severed head. The 5 remaining men stood around the 2 bodies. "Alpha is eliminated. Operators 4 and 2 are KIA, awaiting..." Out of seemingly nowhere, a deer came into the team's view. The medical staff quickly picked up the grieving god and loaded him into the craft that had landed earlier. The operators turned their weapons towards the deer. It approached Apollo's remains and lowered its head towards him before looking back at the 5 surviving operators. Across the surrounding wilderness, thousands of animals cried out at once. Howls, shrieks, bellows, and roars rolled across the field from every direction. "She is here," the operator said. A tear fell from one of the deer's silvery eyes as it stared at the operator. "We'll buy time. Ready the poachers," the operator finished. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.